Welcome to Wellness Wonderland, your holistic wellness hub. Join us each week as we dive into the realms of alternative medicine, mindfulness, spirituality, and everything in between. I'm your host, Nicole Papageorge, and I'd like to introduce our special guest for today, Jyoti. Jyoti is an energetic somatic practitioner based in Charlotte, North Carolina. She facilitates one-on-ones, small groups, and somatic dance workshops. And we connected a couple weeks ago, and there were so many golden nuggets in our conversation that I had to have her on the podcast. So, Jyoti, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a great day so far. I just onboarded a new client today. A new client's always so exciting because it's just an unfolding of their inner journey that I get to guide them through. So it's been a wonderful day so far.
Well, congratulations. Yay.
Thank
That's so
you.
exciting. That's cool. Well, let's dive into it. So, can you tell the audience what exactly somatics is? Because maybe a lot of people haven't even heard that word. So, yeah, just what is it exactly?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you think about the root of somatics, it's rooted in the word soma, which is Greek for living body. So
Mm,
it's really focused on how we store different emotions and trauma in our body, which I know probably still sounds like a lot of words. So a favorite statistic that I like to share is that our mind and body are always communicating. And you would think that most messages go from our mind to our body, but it's actually the opposite because it incorporates our nervous system. And so, actually, 80% of the messages go from our body to our mind, and only 20% go from our mind to our body.
fascinating. I had no idea. It
Yeah,
makes sense.
it surprised me too.
That's crazy. Well, that's super cool. And we've definitely seen a lot of like somatic practitioners and like that word just being used more and more. I think it's definitely becoming more popularized in the holistic wellness space. And it's something that's definitely needed. So tell us a little more about why you chose that path. Like how did that fit into your calling?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've tried, gosh, so many things over the years. When I was 11, I started yoga, more like holistic remedies. I've tried different Ayurvedic practices, acupuncture, traditional talk therapy. And I still kind of struggled with my emotions. I still felt disconnected from myself. And before getting into somatics, I was actually working as a healthcare consultant. And one of the doctors that was my client was sharing that her daughter's a somatic therapist. And I had the same thought that probably a lot of you are having, like, what even is somatics? And I started to look into it and research it, and it just started to make so much sense that it's not just all in our mind. You know, you can talk through things so many times and still feel so stuck in the same patterns. And
Mm,
the more I kind of dove into the body and started learning about it, everything just started making more sense. I like to share a personal example to kind of share more of the essence. And so, I would end up in these kind of stressful, confusing situations, and people would ask me, Jyoti, how do you feel? And my answer would be, I don't know. And it's like, how do you not know how you feel?
mm.
And I spent so much of my life thinking there's something wrong with me. I must be broken. That is really weird that I don't know how I feel. And it would take me days, weeks, sometimes months to figure out how I feel. And after learning about somatics, I realized I wasn't crazy. There's nothing wrong with me. It's just when we end up in stressful situations, a part of our frontal lobe actually just shuts down because it's too stressful and it goes into survival mode. And our amygdala, which handles our emotional state, kind of jumps into the front seat. And so when that switch happens, your nervous system takes over and you basically end up living out patterns that live inside your body. And slowly, as you regulate, as you come back into safety, you start to actually recognize how you're feeling because your brain finally feels safe enough to kind of fully come back online and maybe share like the essence of what you may have been experiencing. And so I think it just gave me the permission to know that my feelings are safe, that I'm not crazy. And, I don't think nervous system work is something that's talked about very much still in the wellness space.
It's definitely not, and I resonate with that too, like, there's times where I just may be feeling, like, off or, like, in a funk or something, and I'm like, "What is wrong? Like, what's wrong with me?" Or, like, "How am I feeling?" And I truly, like, can't find the word. It's just, like, I guess,
Yeah.
deemed, like, in a funk, and that's something, like, societally that's acceptable, I guess. It's like, "Oh, you're just in a funk today," and then you brush it
Yeah.
off, and, like, no one really takes the time to, like, sit with themselves and kind of identify what may be going wrong. Um,
Yeah.
just because I think our world is just so fast paced. It's just like, "Eh, I'm in a funk, whatevs, like, keep going." And it's from our last
Yeah.
conversation, I remember you saying, like, sometimes it can show up in, like, a tickle in your throat or, like, the most subtle, tiny little things that your body's trying to tell you, and we are so, like, I mean, I can't speak for everyone, but for me, it's like, I mean, whatever, like, I'll worry about it later. Like, my throat's a little scratchy, like, just drink some tea. I'm good. And like, I don't really
Right.
take the time to like sit there and really try to figure out what's going on and like go introspectively and like figure it out. So it's important work. And I want you to kind of, if you can, like touch a little more on that.
Yeah. So, it's so funny how so much of this was coming up with my client today too on how, like, and normally in society, people don't talk about anger. They don't talk about, disgust. They don't talk about grief, all these real feelings that we experience, on a semi-regular basis. I don't think grief is just, when someone passes away or when we go through something painful. Grief can even be like releasing an old version of yourself, an old pattern that can bring up so much grief too.
Absolutely.
Um, and I love what you were sharing about the different sensations as well. I like to think of somatics as learning your body's language. I think our bodies are always trying to communicate to us. And, I like to think it starts as like a whisper and then it gets a little louder and louder. And then eventually it might show up as, something emotionally and then eventually physically. But if we can catch those whispers, I feel like it gives us a chance to kind of respond instead of react and just feel like, okay, now I'm like drowning in this emotion. But if you can catch it, then you can be like, okay, maybe I can build space for this. Maybe I can do something differently. And that can show up in so many different ways. Like you said, maybe it's a little bit of constriction in your throat. Maybe it's a tightness in your chest, especially with anxiety. Sometimes it's a knot in your stomach or or just this feeling of like, ooh, something just like doesn't feel right. And it's like, you may think like, ah, maybe I'm just being crazy, but those sensations are usually very real when you feel like in your body something's off. That's your body trying to talk to you.
Absolutely. And I love what you said about grief. I want to touch on that. I actually just went to a women's empowerment meetup last night, and the conversation was over grief. So I love that you just brought that up because that's something that was so recently touched on. And grief is one of those tricky things, like you said, I mean, the biggest thing we think of when we think of grief is like a loss of a person, but it can
Yeah,
also be a loss of a friendship or a relationship or even yourself, which has
yeah,
also been another hot topic of conversation lately is like women like trying to find themselves again or feeling like fragmented pieces of themselves. And we don't give ourselves grace or even really consider that like a grief or a loss, but it is like, and it's important to like acknowledge that and honor that within you and like give yourself the space and the time to process those things. So I love that you
yeah.
touched on that. And somatically speaking, like would you have any tips or tricks if someone's kind of dealing with loss or grief of any instance? Like is there something that they could do to help navigate that or maybe release those feelings from their bodies? Like what would you suggest?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it can show up in so many different ways. But I think, one that would work for grief showing up in any ways, honestly, honoring it. How can you honor the way it's showing up in your life instead of being like, oh, maybe it doesn't make sense to feel grief about this. It's not even a big deal. And I think sometimes we invalidate our own feelings in that way. And so just by honoring it and maybe sensing where it is in your body, maybe, with grief, I find that sometimes it ends up in my heart space too. So just putting your hand on your heart, doing a few heart-centered breaths, even holding yourself and being like, you know what? Maybe it doesn't make sense to feel this much grief, but I do. And I'm going to hold myself through it. And I'm going to honor it and accept it. And I think sometimes that can be the biggest thing is just building our capacity for it. And especially with having grief for past versions of ourselves, I like to think that, those feelings, at least for me, don't necessarily go away. Like, even though I've released that past version of myself, I believe that these parts of us still live within us. So it's like sometimes we have another practitioner friend of mine calls it our loyal soldiers. It's these parts of ourselves that maybe we create at some point in life because it wasn't safe to be our full authentic self or wasn't safe enough to be in our full expression. And so we make this kind of maybe more dimmed version of ourselves. And then
Mhm.
eventually you feel ready to release it, but then it's like that part of you has been there for so long, right? So then there's like a sense of grief in releasing it. But then it's like, how can you choose to like honor it and be like, you know what? I'm so happy that this version of me got me to where I am today.
Absolutely. Because without that version of you or without those actions, you wouldn't be where you are now, no matter how light
Yeah.
or dark, right? Like we have to honor those shadow parts of ourselves, or maybe they're not shadow parts of ourselves. That's something that I've had to navigate. Like my past experiences, I used to travel a lot and
Mm.
I lived out of the country for quite a while. And that's something that moving back to the States was like a really hard transition for me. And I'd always found myself kind of living in my head about like the past life experiences I had. I used to live here, I used to live there, I used to do this. I want to get back to that. Like that's the goal, that's the life, that's where I want to be. And I always lived in that like past version of myself instead of being present in the moment and realizing like, yeah, that could be the end goal to get back and like live that awesome, beautiful lifestyle. But like I'm not living here and now, and like, what can I learn from the experiences right in front of me instead of like continuing to go back and be like, but I was there, I was doing this, I was doing that, I want to get back to that. And it's like, there's a reason you're not there. There's look ahead
Right.
or look just here and now and in the moment. And like, how can you find gratitude and love for those moments instead of like grieving or just like living and not moving beyond where you used to be?
Yeah, yeah, so true. I think that's why I like somatic dancing so much because I
Mhm.
think of emotions as energy in motion, right? And so when you're able to move and kind of move through some of those emotions and find like when I dance, it's like it brings alive this like inner joy within me. And sometimes with somatic dance too, it doesn't have to be so heavy. Like of course, if there's an intention and an emotion you want to move through, absolutely a perfect space for that. But sometimes you don't have to worry about the story. You just shake and you move and you allow your body to release whatever it does. And you just know that you feel lighter and more present after.
I love that. I think I've been doing somatics without even knowing I was doing somatics, which a lot
Yeah.
of people probably do. I've always like, I've noticed subconsciously, like I self-soothe. If I'm getting really, really anxious or something, I'll kind of just take a huge deep breath and like, and I subconsciously was like, I'm breathing, I'm calming myself down.
I
Interesting.
love that.
Yeah. Or if I've had like a really hard day or I'm in a funk, like I always blast music and I'll start dancing and I'll start moving and I'll start shaking. Because I mean, you're having a dance party with yourself. Is life really that bad when you're like moving and grooving and dancing around? And I mean, that's somatics, right? That's
Yeah, I was just thinking
processing
that. I was
things.
like, you're already doing it.
I love
I
that.
love that.
That's so cool. Well, tell us a little more about what you're doing in the community, like any events coming up. Where can we find you? Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, I'm trying to bring more of this into our community through different dance workshops, collaborating with other people in the wellness space. So, there's another yoga teacher, Key Chasey. We're collaborating on a Galima event focused on how can you really create safety and space for repressed anger. I think it's an emotion that so many of us repress and there's it's not talked about much. Sometimes it feels like if I allow myself to get angry it's going to be too much, and so it's a Galima workshop kind of focused on how can you empower yourself to feel the anger and release it so that you don't have to feel so heavy all the time. And anger is also just showing us where we may need boundaries, where we may need space. It doesn't have to be this like shamed, intense emotion. So that event is coming up on April 27th. You can find the links in our bios on Instagram. I'm at Follow Your Jyoti. I am also coming up with a really exciting event that I'm announcing on here. So it will
Ooh.
be a blindfolded somatic dance event where you really get to deepen into your senses, deepen into your body. If you think about it, when our eyes are open, we're taking in so much stimuli. You're thinking, how's that person moving? What's happening over here? And with the blindfolds, the way you're able to drop into your body is just at a completely different level. And so I can't wait to bring that alive for our community.
So cool.
That event is going to be on May 5th from 2 to 4. And
Awesome.
then I also am putting together a small women's program that will also be launching at some point in May, to really deepen into a lot of this. So it'll be focused on 4 different archetypes. And the first one will be grounding. How can you? So, a lot of what you were saying, like you start to feel anxious, and then you notice that, like, oh, all right, maybe I need to take a deep breath. And it'll be, some of that incorporated into it. Like when you feel that anxiety coming on, when you feel that panic coming on, how can you allow yourself to soften? How can you show your body that it is safe to feel this? We don't have to completely shut down. We can just expand our capacity. And then moving through, our sensuality as well. That's something else that is, at least being Indian by background, it's something for me that has been so shamed, not talked about. But it is a big part of our lives. And so, how can you get in touch with that and remind yourself that it is safe to feel pleasure? It is safe to just, touch my arm and feel good about that.
Yes.
Repressed anger, and then also ending with how can you express your like inner wild woman as well? Just full expression, how to fully let go and just allow yourself to be in your full self. So
Well,
that is called Shakti, and I'm so excited to kind of bring that together for the women in Charlotte, and keeping it small so that each woman can get kind of tailored, more personalized somatic sessions as well.
that
So
sounds amazing. You are doing quite a bit for the community of Charlotte, and that is freaking awesome. So, first of all, thank you as a woman that lives in Charlotte, because it is extremely important to have a space where, one, I mean, feeling safe to just show up radically and authentically as yourself. I'm hosting women's circles, and that's just, it's been such a hot topic of conversation for women specifically. It's like, we wear these layers or these shields, or like you said, like repressing anger, repressing our emotions in general, because maybe we're moms and we just have so many things on our plates that we don't give ourselves time to for ourselves, or
yeah,
so much going on that it's just like, I don't want to like deal with my emotions, shove them down, continue forward, or hitting on the pleasure sense. Like a lot of guilt and shame is around pleasure and sensuality and sexuality in general. And it doesn't even have to be sexualized, but
Right.
you shouldn't have pain or shame or any sort of feelings about like feeling your damn self, like
Yeah.
show up and love yourself and be confident and love who you are. And there is so much, even for me, like I feel that when I'm showing up and like loving myself in public or online, there's still that like cringiness or that hesitation or that fear of being judged from society that like women specifically are told like don't do that or don't show too much skin or
Yeah.
like how dare you wear that, and it's like no, it shouldn't be that way, it really shouldn't. And I honor you for creating a safe space for women to explore and navigate those feelings, because I don't think that's something that is really readily available to the masses. It's really not. And hitting on like the anger thing, I want to just touch on that. Like that's a
Yeah.
feeling I personally hate feeling. When I'm mad or upset, like I cry because I don't
Yeah.
like confrontation and I don't like being mad at people. So I try not to even do that, like I try to either avoid it completely or just not navigate those emotions, or when they do show up, I want to process them as fast as possible and like move on. But that's not healthy because it's stored in our body,
Yeah, exactly. See, you already are a somatics pro too. Yeah,
Oh,
you touched on so many great things. And speaking about your experience with anger, I think that's a collective feeling for a lot of women, for a lot of people, is that, at a young age, I think a lot of us were taught that anger is not an acceptable emotion. I know for me, I was taught, like, any emotion that is not happiness, you have to go to your room, figure it out. And when you're ready to be, a good, happy kid, come back down, and you can kind of re-enter. And so, those beliefs that we had at such an early age, they don't just disappear, unfortunately. They can, still live within our body until we give that version of ourselves kind of a space to express too. In working with anger, I also find myself working with the younger version of me and
mhm.
being like, hey, it's okay. It is safe to experience anger. It doesn't have to be this big, scary thing. I think a lot of us may hold beliefs too that if I actually allow myself to get angry, it's going to be too much, or maybe I'm going to ruin all my relationships, or people are going to be mad at me. But it's interesting because I think it's that belief that holds us back, but then it's like that belief that also is why so many of us have repressed anger. Because there's this fear of like it's going to be too much. And so it gets repressed. But then it's like if you can find healthy ways to express that, you get to release it, feel so much lighter, and not have this like heaviness within you too. Because they're finding the healthy ways. There's no such thing as it being too much. I like to take my clients through an exercise where you just yell and it feels super weird, super uncomfortable. One of my favorite teachers taught me, which is how I guide my clients, like you might sound like a dying pig, you might sound like a ferret in pain, and you just make space for
Just
all
doing
of
it.
it, right?
Yeah.
Because, in a safe space, there's no such thing as too much. And it is intense. And so that's why I want to, have a smaller group of women that I take this through, because there can be a lot of grief afterwards. You can need a lot of holding afterwards because it's been suppressed for so long that it feels scary at moments to be like, oh wow, I do have this in me. But then the safety and the lightness you feel after is also unlike anything I've felt before.
Wow.
And so I just, my intention and my vision is just to build a community and just build safety for women, that it is safe to be angry. It is safe to be sensual. It is safe to, let your wild woman make an appearance. And so
Yes.
I love that you're doing the full moon circles too. I think we need a lot more of that in our community.
We really do, and it's beautiful work too. It's very rewarding when you can create a space and just allow it to, like, flow as it should. Because I don't know about you, I'm sure it's a similar experience, but every event, every circle is so different because of the people that come to it or just the energy or the vibration or whatever the conversation is needed. I feel like it's so intuitively and divinely led sometimes. And to just be witness to that space is so freaking magical. It just fills my damn cup and I love it.
Yeah,
So I love it. We're
absolutely.
definitely gonna have to do a collaboration together because your events and what you're doing is so important and so beautiful. And I really do appreciate you and your work. I think it's amazing.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I try to do, a lot of my sessions and the workshop parts of it definitely intuitively. So, you can kind of feel what's needed in the room
Mhm.
and allow people to share what's on their hearts, what's on their minds, and kind of build and co-create an experience. Even in my sessions, I like to tell my clients that, this is not just me telling you a whole bunch of practices that you do. We're on this journey together. I just want to help you unlock what is already within you.
Exactly. And that's what being a guide and a healer is all about. Like, we can't do it for you, but here's some tools and some tips and some tricks and some guidance and a loving, nurturing space that can be held for you to explore yourself.
I love that. What a perfect way to summarize it. I feel like that's all, honestly, most people need is just a safe, nurturing space to just allow whatever needs to come through.
It's so, so true. And I could talk so much more on that, but for time's sake, we'll wrap up. Can you tell the followers again where they can find you, where they can find your events, and how they
Yeah,
can connect with you?
absolutely. You can find me on Instagram at follow your Jyoti. So FOLLOW your and then JYOTI. Same for my website, followyourjyoti.com. All my events and material will be on my Instagram and website. I would love to connect with you all. Even if you're just curious about somatics or want to connect, feel free to drop me a message or a DM.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jyoti, for being on the podcast and for all that you do. And I look forward to attending your events and also co-facilitating, hopefully.
Yes, I would love that. Thank you so much for having me on.
Of course. Well, big thanks for tuning into Wellness Wonderland. If any of this resonates, join the community by clicking that subscribe button and connect on social at Wellness Wonderland Collective for daily inspiration and insights on what's going on in the community. Until next time, stay curious, stay well, and lead with love in all you do.